So the question today, which we get very often, is what are publishers looking for and what are they buying now? So welcome to Reality Coaching for Writers, Eddie.
Yeah, nothing but the real stuff, no fluff. And that is one of the questions that we used to get at writers' conferences all the time. People would pitch books and then they go, "Well, really, what are they buying?" People wanted to sell something. So
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And
It changes over the years. What the publishers buy changes from year to year almost.
it does, and yet there's basics that they're always looking for. So we'll share today, especially in nonfiction, every publisher is always looking for what we call it's a perennial topic. And those perennials are something they want on their list every year. So, for instance, these are nonfiction. They're always looking for a parenting book, a book on marriage, a book on relationships, a book on prayer, and a business leadership book, and often a Bible study. And you can take any of these perennial categories and then break them into age appropriate. So, of course, not parenting, but a book on prayer for children, age appropriate, picture book, middle reader and teen, as well as adults. So there's 4 areas underneath that category that publishers are interested in looking at. And so relationships, let's face it, Christians are no better than the world at getting their relationships straight. So there's always a book on relationships. And I've had a peek into what publishers have recently bought in the last month. So I thought I'd share a few of those with you, who the publisher was, the topic of the book, and I will share, not sharing the title because the title might change, it might not, but I will share the author's name. So you might want to look and see the type of platform that the author has that help them get the publisher's attention. So does that sound good, Eddie? I'll share a couple of those.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what the publishers are buying.
So IVP, which is InterVarsity Press, purchased a recent book on suffering. And there's 3 authors that have personally experienced suffering, and it's bringing their 3 perspectives to the book, to the topic of suffering. But the one author that I did look at is Elizabeth Hall, and she's a professor of psychology at Biola University, which that's another thing that we're often coaching nonfiction writers about is if you're an expert on the topic, then publishers are more interested in taking a look at something you have. And Elizabeth is a professor of psychology, which, she would have had studies that pertain to suffering and how people react to suffering. And so she's bringing her perspective to the topic. Zonder Kids recently bought a picture book. This is for ages 4 to 8 on being brave. It's honesty, believing, or honesty, bravery, perseverance, and courage. So that's a picture book for young readers from ages 4 to 8. And they just purchased that. Paraclete Press They just bought a Lift the Flap book, again for children, and it's on joy, and it is a Christmas season book. So they are buying now for Christmas for next year. And Broadman and Holdman recently bought a picture book for ages 4 to 8, and on how God can make difficult things, can help you with when life throws difficult things your way. But in the adults section on prayer, there was a book that was bought by, I didn't write it down, but the interesting thing about that is this girl, the author's name is Rachel Wojo, Wojo. And if you go and look her up, she has had a popular blog. She's led a women's ministry for years that's received national attention. And again, these are people with platforms that, are launching books. But the children's, it's a different criteria. It's not necessarily platform, but did you notice what they're talking about with the children? Joy. Christmas is a time when there's more joy, but also bravery, because boy, we're living in a brave new world that we need to have bravery and courage, and especially if you're a Christian growing up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the bravery and courage were things that we kind of picked up organically when we were coming along, because, and I may get in trouble for saying this, but we weren't as sheltered, so we kind of had to learn how to be brave and put up with it. There was the whole topic of bullying. We knew that there were bullies when we were growing up at school, but we also knew that nobody's going to do anything about it. So
Right.
you learn everybody learned how to deal with the bullies in your school. One of the ways was to avoid them, not engage them. And then if they did come at you, eventually you just found a way to disengage yourself with them. I mean, but we just kind of had to pick that stuff up organically. And now kids don't get that organically, because in a lot of cases, they're so sheltered, they're so put in routines, and their parents take care of them, so they have to have a book to kind of figure some of this stuff out.
Right. And a lot of the Aesop's fables and things that were classic literature years ago, they kind of talked about bravery and honesty and things like that within the fables, but we got away from those. We got away from those. And I think we got into the Power Rangers, the Ninja Turtles, and they were all superheroes. So it was somebody outside of ourselves that was rescuing us, instead of us learning some living skills to, some necessary skills for living. Yeah. So they're coming back around now to teach the kids some of those. There's one coming out that I'm really excited about. I can't wait to look at, and I mentioned it to you, Eddie. Tyndale is publishing a book called God with Us, and it's an autobiography of Jesus. And I'm really looking forward to seeing, it talks about all the events in Jesus's life and how he approached them and responded to them. So, and Tyndale is a very reputable publisher who publishes scripture, and this is very scripturally sound, so you don't have to worry that it's out there. But I'm looking forward to reading that, God with Us. So yeah, that's going to be published soon.
That'll be an interesting book to read, an interesting project, because we were last night at our Bible study down at Moore Square. I was explaining about the 4 Gospels and how each one of them had a different the writer had a different focus, for each of the gospels. Um, and there's either chronologically or it's based, for the Hebrew, for the Jewish audience, or in John's case, he was actually trying to make the case that Jesus was God. So yeah, it was his agenda. But to your point, nothing's really in a bucket. We don't have the gospel based on topics, from
Right.
Jesus' perspective. I mean, we've got some of that in the book of Matthew, but you don't have his actions, for example, which is what this book kind of hints at. And so it will be an interesting way to see how he dealt with different circumstances and situations. Yeah, that'll be kind of fun.
Yeah. And so recent ones that have been released in January, Andy Stanley's book was Parenting, Getting It Right. So there we have one of the perennial topics. October of 2022, Zondervan released Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools, an invitation to the wonder and mystery of prayer. So there's prayer. So we've got parenting, prayer, and there are 3 books soon to release. These are upcoming, soon to be released titles. They're up for pre-sale right now, all related to the Enneagram. Eddie, have you done the personality type test called the Enneagram?
No, I did the Myers-Briggs and it was dead on. So
Myers-Briggs was dead on for me too. And the Enneagram hit me right on as well, backed up. But the interesting thing is, this Enneagram test, there are the 3 books that are soon to be released. One is related to relationships, one is related to marriage, and one is related to business and leadership. So again, you see how the publishers stick with those perennials.
Yeah, I do.
At that list. I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, before we came on, I was thinking about this topic because it goes back to Ecclesiastes when Solomon said the end of making books, there will be no end to the making of books. It just never stops. Because when I was thinking about the whole thing about prayer, I was like, I mean, all of the Bible there are lots of examples of how to pray, and I plagiarize prayers all the time from scripture. I plagiarized one yesterday from Eleazar, the servant of Abraham. It's a prayer about success. He's basically saying, give me success. I need success. And so that's, so you can go through scripture and find prayers that relate to what you're looking for and then rework them to your circumstances. So anyway, the Bible's full of prayers, but then we go in every year, like you said, we have one more book on how to pray,
Yeah, and not just one book. We have all the publishers coming out with a book on prayer. So
right. And it strikes me that if you have to keep coming out with books on a particular topic, then maybe we haven't hit the right formula for how to deal with that topic yet, right? People are still trying to cook,
Exactly. And the other thing is, why are we trying to formulate something that is meant to just be a conversation between 2 intimate parties? We're in intimate relationship with God, and my prayer life is going to look different, Eddie, than your prayer life. And it's going to change with whatever season I'm living in. So I think many of these books, though, to say, give a justification for their publication, is that a lot of small groups like to have a book that they can use to, look at prayer together in a small group situation. So many of these books are so useful for that purpose. And, even in 10 years, we are looking at life differently because culturally things have changed surrounding us, the way the world has changed. So that's why we can always keep looking at something fresh, and from a different angle. So there's something about people that God put this in us, is to always be searching out a matter. I think there's even a scripture for that, that God delights in watching us search out a matter, and dig and get deeper. And so that's part of the fun too.
That's true. That is true. Yeah. Well, I've seen some trends in running the Book Deals website, because I get these 99-cent free offers that come up, and so
Right.
I try to feature them. And so there are some themes that have keep cropping up in that, and these are not from traditional publishers. I don't know if they're from traditional publishers or not. They could be. I never really pay much attention to the publisher, but there is a trend for how to hear God.
Mhm.
So you've got the prayer on the one side, which is what you've talked about, but then on the other side is how do we hear God? So there seems to be a lot of books about how to hear God. A ton of books on near-death experiences. So that's a whole new blown up phenomenon. It almost seems like these days, almost everybody that dies seems to come back before they go the second time. It's like everybody is a Lazarus these days, because everybody seems like just a lot of near-death experiences. And to me, that's one of those, now I don't even feature them anymore, because it's almost become, I think in some cases it may be almost demonic. I'm not questioning the authors, but the fact that there are so many of these books coming out, and we don't see much in scripture about what happens in heaven. We get John's perspective, and Paul hints at it, but even Paul didn't talk about it. So anyway, that's a trend. Those are the two big ones probably I see a lot of coming across, is near death and how to hear God. But the other one is occasionally I'll see them on healing, and also on how to deal with spiritual warfare. And that's kind of a trend that kind of runs around a lot also. And again, Diane, it's one of those things where I'm sitting there featuring these books, but I'm thinking, well, if somebody had found the right formula, there would only be one book. That would be the one everybody would be buying. But it doesn't seem like anybody's really found all of the right formula. They may have parts of it, but not all of it yet, I guess.
Right. It kind of reminds me of when we're on YouTube and a commercial comes across and says, have you been trying to make money doing this? Well, stop it. None of that works. Come and do this one thing. And then, in 6 months, they'll be offering a new, better way to make $1 million by, while sitting at the beach. Yeah. I don't think so. But one of the other topics, nonfiction, and then I want to move on to fiction, what publishers are buying, but is purpose. A lot of, starting last fall, a lot of authors were writing, well-published authors were writing about purpose. I know Bob Goff. I don't know if anybody's read any Bob Goff, but he's a kind of what I would call a positive, what's the word that Schuler used to get? Positive.
Motivational speaker, teacher.
Yeah, motivational, but positivity, speaker. But his books are feel-good books. They make you feel good. They're great books to do with small groups. But he put one out in the fall, in October of last year. And the subtitle is, it's about purpose. And Undistracted, I think is the name of it. And it was about purpose. And then Dr. Darius Daniels, who I love to read, he put a book out, Relational Intelligence, last year in the spring. And then in the fall, a book on finding your purpose. And it's amazing how many Christians are unsure of their purpose, and they make it very complicated. When, if you're in relationship with God, it should come to us in those conversations with God what purpose he has for us. I keep it simple and just say, what's the thing in my hand? That's
Right.
the thing I'm going to use. Right. So, but it does never cease to amaze me how clueless Christians are about how to live our lives.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's probably more of a Western culture issue than it is probably anywhere else on the planet, because people in the Western culture, they want a formula, they want a process, they want to put it in a package, and they want to make sure they're going to get results in the end. That's America, right?
Yeah,
And
that's true.
That's the way we come at God and Jesus. Let me figure this thing out, put it in a package, repurpose it, and sell it. And now I've got a church, or I've got a ministry, or I've got a platform, or I've got something, right? And I'm looking at it going, I didn't see anybody put Jesus in a box. I mean,
Right.
they couldn't even keep him in a tomb when he was dead. How are we going to put him in a box in the 21st century or whatever? That's not going to work.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
the thing I was looking for, you mentioned about the business leadership. Have you seen anything that the publishers are picking up on church growth, or how to deal with church growth going forward? Have you seen anything come across your desk about that?
As an agent, I saw that about 5-6 years ago. I saw talk about church growth, but I think since the pandemic, I haven't seen the books coming out. I think people are still scrambling right now on what does church growth look like now. If anything, I hear conversations about the house church, and because the mega churches have never recouped their numbers
Right.
since the pandemic, and I think God is kind of doing a new thing. So I haven't yet. I'm sure there's some in the pipeline, but that would be a good topic for someone with some expertise or knowledge to write on.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's why I was asking the question, because I'm not sure that trend has actually been picked up yet.
I haven't seen anything. Yeah.
I was thinking about it last night, because Pat and I were down at Moore Square doing our Bible study, with the people down at Moore Square. And it was pretty cool. It's, 7:30 at night, it's dark down in the park. We're at a picnic table, and we got flashlights and a Bible, and all kind of people are just wandering up, stuff, just basically wandering up. And I was telling Scott Thomas, I was like, this is exactly how Jesus did it. He didn't have a building, he was outside, or he was borrowing, Peter's house, or in Capernaum he was, borrowing a room or something like that. But he'd go somewhere else's house. But I think a lot of times he was outside, talking. And it was Pat. It was Pat and I. So that's two. Anyway, driving home, I was thinking, 12 people in a house church, or basically 2 or 3 families going out 2 by 2, witnessing and ministering and helping, coming back to get rejuvenated. I said, maybe that's the trend that's going forward. And I really think the younger crowd, I mean, the 30-year-old and younger, I think that's probably going to appeal to them, because they're so outdoor oriented anyway. For them to be in a temple, which is what I call a church. You're a temple. You're doing temple worship. I said, I just think I don't see them sitting in the pews for the next 50 years. I see them more being outside in the marketplace in a coffee shop. So
I love that. And Eddie, that brings up that a couple books are being made into movies. And one of them is one of my favorite books by Greg Laurie, Jesus Revolution, is going to be soon released. And he wrote in Jesus Revolution what the Jesus Freak movement, which he was a big part of, and his church was birthed out of that Jesus movement in the 1970, 71. He got a vision, not vision, but he felt in his spirit that God was going to have another Jesus revolution, and it's going to be through the young people, and it's going to look nothing like we can even imagine. It's going to usurp anything that happened in the Jesus freak movement of the 70s. And other pastors are getting similar stirrings in their spirit that this is true. And so the movie is going to be released, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it. I was a part of that Jesus freak movement, traveled, was at a lot of those major events. And so when reading Jesus Revolution, it just stirred up my heart with all that, and kind of has been stirring similar things in my spirit, Eddie, is to get outside the church, into the highways and byways where the people are. I love what you're doing in Moore Square. And it is, Jesus loved being among the Pharisees, and the sad, the general populace, because he loved people,
Right.
And so
that's what I was telling Tim last night. We were talking about, the question came up about tithing, about 10%. And I was like, well, if you give your life to Christ, you don't have anything. You just gave it all up. So it's not 10, it's 100% tithing is what you're doing. That's what he's basically saying. So anything less than 100%, it's working out better for you, if you get to keep 10. And then I said, but you look at the churches, there are 4 churches within 100 yards, almost 100 yards of Moore Square, probably wow. four churches. I said, none of these churches are housing people at night. They're letting them sleep on their steps, but they're not bringing them inside. I said, I think if Jesus were here, he'd be knocking on the door. Can I bring my friends in? Can I bring my friends in and put them up in your basement, and give them something to eat? I think that's what he would be doing. But I think the churches haven't figured that out. That's why I asked the question about church growth. Yeah. Because I think church growth is probably going to be a different concept going forward than it is now. Rather than members in the church, it's how many people are we serving in the church? How many neighbors? Anyway, I get on my soapbox. So
I love that. That's so good, Eddie. So good. I'm already thinking of a few pastors I might call to say, write this book.
Yeah.
Because you
don't need much to get by. I don't need much to get by. We could go live in a church. We could go get a little cubicle, and that would be our spot. We and a whole bunch of other people. So
that's right.
Well, listen, we're running out of time. So what's your closing comment on the trends? What would you tell our listeners today?
Well, if you really feel called to write in any of these categories that we mentioned, just become an expert, or look at where you are an expert, where it overlaps with your personal experience, and then that's how you want to frame writing your book. But just don't limit yourself talking about these topics in book length. Think of articles you can write for magazines. If God gives you something on any of these topics that you feel you have something to say, then find a way to say it.
Yeah. And my closing comment would be almost the same. Whatever is moving you right now, whatever you're passionate about, that you would write about anyway, that may be the book that God's calling you to write.
Yes.
And start where you are.
Yes. Hey, listen, don't forget to subscribe and leave us comments what topics you'd like us to talk about. We'd love to do that.
Great. Thanks, Diana. See you next week.
Thanks, Eddie. We'll see you next week. Bye.